Welcome back to Meraki Unboxed. My name's Simon Thompson, your host for today. Wonderful to have you joining us on the podcast again. I say this every time, but we really are truly grateful for our regular listeners and subscribers who have sat through almost 80 episodes of this podcast now since we started it in 2019. The time has flown by, but so much good content we have in the can, a lot of which is still relevant today. It doesn't really age that badly at all. So I would recommend taking a look back through the archives if you're really interested in Meraki and our technology, and also how we apply that to the real world. And that is very much the focus of our episode today. I'm really excited about this one because, as I've said, and you've heard me say many times before, we do love to bring partners onto the podcast, whether they are deploying our technology or they're actually partnering and building on our technology with solutions of their own. I think there's so much opportunity with what we've built here at Cisco Meraki, and we love to just explore that with those who are out at the sharp end, dealing with real-world challenges and use cases. I think one of the great things that we are very proud of at Meraki, and you've no doubt heard this word a million times from us, is the simplicity. We have worked so hard to build a solution that is significantly easier to live with and manage on a day-to-day basis than solutions that came before it. And of course, if you simplify one thing, it enables you to expand and do more. That's exactly what we want to get into today. And so to get us into this conversation, I want to introduce our guest, Jeff Bright. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Good afternoon.
It's good afternoon where you are. Where are you calling in from?
From Oklahoma.
Okay.
Oklahoma.
And it's how's the weather in Oklahoma today? Is it as warm as it is on the West Coast?
It's very warm and humid. We had a big round of thunderstorms overnight, but now the sun has come out and it's going to be hot.
Good day for air conditioning by the sounds of it.
Very.
We'll come right back to you in just a moment, Jeff. I also want to bring in another Jeff. We're going to call him Jeffrey on the show just to avoid confusion. Mr. Handel from Cisco Meraki. How are you doing?
I am doing excellent, Simon.
Great. And tell us a little bit about what you do at Meraki.
Oh, I get to play with everybody around the world, covering the globe and thinking about solutions everywhere and anywhere from Houston, Texas.
That's a pretty broad description. What's your actual job title? What do you do for us?
I'm a global TSA. I get to hear people's problems and think about solutions and how to solve them together using our platforms within the Cisco portfolio.
We do love to bust acronyms on this show. So TSA, Technical Solutions Architect. Did I get that right?
That is correct, Simon. Or in the old days, these used to be just simple systems engineer, the ones that make everything tick and make everything work.
It's a great job. I love that job. We've actually had Jeffrey Handel on the show before covering IPv6. Which is a topic we know is near and dear to his heart. If you're into IPv6 and what we've been doing with that, just dig back through the archives. I'm sure you'll find that episode pretty quickly. But the star of our show today, I want to bring back in Jeff Bright from Bright Systems. So Jeff, tell us what you do. And obviously the organization, it sounds like it's all about your name. And so tell us a little bit about it.
Bright Systems has been around since 2009. So 13 years now. My experience goes back 32 years. Started out working with Microsoft LAN Manager and NetBEUI, the bridged protocol, way back in '88. My first experience with Cisco was in 1991, and I've been working on Cisco networks ever since. I've got multiple professional level certification, CCNP Enterprise now, CCNP Security. That's pretty much, that covers it there pretty succinctly.
Well, it's a pretty extensive list already. So we can say that you know a thing or two about networks by this point. Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your history. You started it off there. I love hearing some of these old names. The NetBEUI, my goodness. I think that was still around just about when I was starting my career in networking. That was in the late 90s. So it hung around for a while, I guess. But so we don't send the younger audience to sleep, maybe we just go through quickly a little bit of the history of your experience with networking and how you came to be working with Cisco and ultimately with Meraki.
So back in the early 90s, I was working for an oil and gas company. And when I first arrived there, they had several disparate 4 megabit token ring networks using the old Type 1 cable and the token ring mouse. And
we should. I've got to interrupt you, Jeff, because if let me see if I remember this correctly. The token ring, the first version of that, isn't this the one where you kind of clamp directly into the cable?
Yeah, actually, that was the Ethernet. Those were the vampire taps.
Oh, okay, all right.
The token ring had a very large connector on the end, and you had to plug it into the MAU, and you had to make sure that the ring, was complete, so that the network would work correctly. But we quickly determined that wasn't scalable, and we started transitioning towards Ethernet. And at the time, it was still bridged Ethernet via hubs. And then right about that time, the first Ethernet switches became available, and we started doing 10 megabit switched Ethernet. And at the time, everything was running on Novell NetWare, but we decided that we didn't think that was going to be scalable for the long term, and we were running TCP/IP and NetBIOS over that. So that ended up working very well, and we were using Cisco routers, the old 2500s. I think I've even got like a 3000 still, one of the original ones, and we're doing frame relay across the country to the different locations. Wow. And then eventually started getting ATM and now MPLS at the time.
I think you've touched on almost every single networking technology that's ever existed. That's incredible.
The only one that I didn't touch was X.25, but I did actually see some networks that were utilizing that, and they actually had some connections going down into South America with that.
It's really amazing. And things have changed so much, and the challenges have changed so much as well over time. I can't help just reminiscing for a minute. I remember when I first became a network engineer, we had a campus network with about 1,500 people working on it, and it was all connected with hubs, the entire campus. And of course, for those of you who are too young to know this, that means that your broadcast domain is basically the entire site and every single device that's on it. It's incredible, and how we ever got any work done, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Simon, on the topic of reminiscing, believe it or not, I am not that old, but I did get to work with Token Ring and actually didn't know what I was holding in my hand at the time. But I did work through the transition of going from Token Ring to Ethernet to putting the very first wireless networks that had blinking lights with no connections for many years. So I've been on the journey with you guys.
Yep. It's been a fun ride. But of course, we know, Ethernet's all dominant now, and we should sort of bring the story forwards a little bit. Let's think about how Bright Systems came into existence, obviously built on the back of all of this experience.
So I worked for an oil and gas company for a while, worked for a broadcast industry company for a while. Then I worked for a small partner and then a much larger Cisco Gold partner. And then I decided to spin off on my own. And I've been doing that since 2009. Taking on both large and small customers. There is no limit to what we will look at. And I still have some very large customers, and I have some, I actually installed some Meraki equipment in people's homes, and it works very well.
I'm sure many of us are using that. I've got some in myself, and I'm sure Jeff has as well. So I mean, it's amazing stuff, and I think one of the things that we definitely wanted to get into on this episode, because we've got a lot of obviously partners around the world, many tens of thousands of partners, and they all sort of get to share in this experience of standing on the shoulders, if you like, of that Meraki simplicity and building solutions for our customers. But Jeff sort of came to our attention because the sheer variability and scale variance in the solutions that Jeff's worked on, pretty fascinating, and so much so that we had to call this episode the Solutionist, and we just made up that word, and we wanted to just really focus on some of that innovation. Jeffrey Handel, sorry for the confusion, everybody, but we have got two Jeffs here. Jeffrey Handel from Meraki Maybe you could walk us through with Jeff some of the stories. Let's get into it.
Awesome. Yes, actually happened to meet Mr. Jeff Bright a long time ago by sheer accident. We sat on a at the same table and started talking. Ever since we've hit it on because he's just like a nerd as me. He looks at a problem, tries to figure out how do we piece it together, and we push the limits on everything that we touch. And one of the great things about Jeff Bright is that he touches anything from very, very simple, just get me a connection however we can, to very complex things with weather stations or pushing large gigabyte things of of bandwidth for video and things like that. So Jeff, in our history, I'd like to explore a little bit more of how we push the boundary when it comes to video. Can you share a little bit about your history, how you used Cisco Meraki to push the bounds of pushing tons of gigabytes of video through limited pipes?
So back during the start of the pandemic in 2020, I had a customer that was doing a lot of video backhaul video encoding, the 4K video encoding for a lot of the professional sporting groups around the United States and even around the world. And they had come to me because they were struggling trying to um, figure out how to configure the Cisco switches. And I said, hey, the Meraki switches are very easy to use. And that logically, and they loved that. And that logically led to introducing the Meraki firewalls, wireless access points, and back during the pandemic, at the start of it, there was a professional sporting event that they had to backhaul an incredible amount of video. Um, and they basically gave me 2 weeks to set up the network. And originally they told me, oh, it might be like, a couple of hundred megabits. And then they said, and then they came to me like 2 weeks before and they said, no, this is probably going to be a couple of gigabits worth of video. So I had to scramble, get a couple of MX250s, and basically set up their network. And in the meantime, they were building a complete broadcast studio to cover this just for this one event. And it carried over 3 or 4 days. I'm not going to elaborate on who it was. You could probably guess. Um, but we basically took all of that video, and unfortunately, it was Zoom video because that was easy for them to use at the time, and we were aggregating all that video and then backhauling it over the internet to the broadcast uplink on the East Coast, and it went off without a hitch. And we were, continually pumping out at least 2 gigabits of video nonstop during the whole event.
And Jeff, I'd like to poke a little bit on this story. I mean, when we think about gigabits of video and tons, Meraki's not the first thing that comes to mind. Why did you decide to put your faith in the platform?
Because it was the easiest thing to configure and consume at the time. I wasn't sure that we were going to be able to get other firewalls, the traditional Cisco firewalls at the time, and get them configured and tuned up to the point where we felt comfortable doing that. But I had a long experience with Meraki, and I was pretty confident that it was going to work, and it did.
I want to just jump in real quick. Jeff, maybe just help us understand how Meraki came to your attention in the first place. Like, what was the first thing that got you into it?
The first Meraki product that I touched was some of the access points, which would have been back like the MR12s, MR16s, and they were so easy to use, so easy to configure. The dashboard, is a wondrous thing, um, versus having to at the time. If you set up a Cisco wireless network, you had to configure the controller and all the access points. And if you really wanted to see, everything that was going on, you had to have prime infrastructure, set up to monitor all of that. And the Meraki just basically turned that on its head and made it so much simpler. So I've embraced it fully, ever since it became available, and it's only, it just keeps getting better and better.
And what Jeff was talking about with the video, I mean, it sounds like you were pushing the boundaries pretty early on.
Absolutely. And even before that, there were several other professional sporting events where there was Meraki switches that they were using to basically funnel all this video. And you'd be stunned if you knew who some of those major sporting events were. Uh, and I was at Cisco Live a number of years ago, and I told the one of the Catalyst managers that, oh, by the way, all the video for this event was going through one of your switches, and he was just stunned.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Jeff, what were the other stories that you were interested in picking up on?
Since I know a little bit of the history of Mr. Jeff Bright, I know at some point in his career he worked with weather a long time ago. He might be able to tell us a little bit about that. But he's come full circle in that and bringing the Meraki platform to play in weather, solving problems using our new sensors, and also while serving wireless. Could you tell us a little bit about how you came about with that solution and what were you serving?
So I started out in college at OU studying meteorology, and at the time they're in the meteorology department. They had an old deck PDP 1170, I think it was, maybe 1144. Anyway, and I was enamored by that. I had never seen a mainframe that I actually had direct access to, and so I pivoted and switched over to computer science. But during the time I was in the meteorology, I was one of the original storm chasers,
Oh,
and
cool.
we would travel all over Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, chasing tornadoes, and uh, there were several times where we would chase out into the Texas Panhandle and see tornadoes, and then come back and into a blizzard in Oklahoma. I mean, that's how variable the weather was. So did that for a number of years. Still have a fond a great interest in the weather. Still follow it very closely. Um, so I had a customer come to me, and they wanted to provide some wireless access to a outdoor festival, a small one, like in a parking lot. So I set my mind to it and went and got a couple of the MR outdoor access points. I believe the 86s were what was available at the time. And I utilized one of the original cellular gateway, the MG21, and set that all up. I used some antenna tripods like you would see on top of a house for the old TV antennas when people would put them on top of their houses, and that worked out well. But I had to have a NEMA enclosure to house the network switch, to provide the power for the devices. So I had to kind of cobble something together there, a couple of struts across the tripod to hold the cabinet in place. And it had to be easy to assemble, and it had to be easy to take down. So I did all of that. I also, right about that time, the Starlink dish arrived last May, and there was a concert series in a park here locally, and I actually took the system out there and set up the dish and was streaming 200 or 300 megabits of Wi-Fi, throughout the park, and it was only for a few hours, but I probably had almost 100 devices that were connected to it, and really didn't advertise or anything. People just saw the Wi-Fi and were joining it. It was actually pretty amazing.
Little did they know that you were pushing the boundary of
Yeah.
using Starlink, which is still in beta.
Hmm.
You probably were, let's just get it out there. You probably were one of the first in the world to probably put a Starlink connection on an MX. And we were testing live in
Yep.
production.
Yep.
And one of the cool things about working with Mr. Bright over the years is when he's conjuring all these solutions, he usually calls me up and pings me and be like, "Do you think this will work?" My answer is yes, but maybe.
That sounds like a systems engineer right there.
But
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with experimentation. That's why we're in this business. We want to experiment. We want to push the boundaries and provide a solution. And the other thing that he did with a lot of these solutions is because of his weather background, he would put a little MT sensor, and now he's essentially giving out the weather at these stations and also monitoring his equipment, make sure he's not getting fried because it's in the middle of the sun and it's not ready for that, right, Mr. Bright?
That is correct.
It sounds like you're speaking from some experience here.
Yes. Yeah. those NEMA enclosures can get pretty warm. So you have to take into account, trying to cool it. I've looked at a number of different things, including some of the Peltier thermodynamic coolers to try to cool some of that equipment.
But what about a story about scale and like a really a sort of large deployment? Obviously, you talked about certainly large in terms of volumes of data with those video solutions. But what about how effectively you found the solution scales for those larger deployments? Any good stories there?
Yep. So there's an oil and gas company here in the Tulsa area, and for the longest time they were an ABC company, anything but Cisco.
I remember
And
that.
they had a number of Juniper firewalls that they were using to basically connect all of their remote sites together, and those were very arduous to take care of and configure and so on and so forth. And as soon as there was a change in leadership there, they were calling me saying, "What can we do to fix that?" I go, "We can replace those Junipers with Meraki." And we did that right off the bat and ended up swapping out about 2 dozen of those, and it's been running like a champ ever since.
And again, it's the simplicity of the management experience, the stability of the equipment. I mean, what comes to mind when you picture Meraki as a solution for these challenges that come your way?
Because it's just so easy to configure the equipment, and the auto VPN. I mean, that is just almost a miracle on how well that works and how easy that is to set up.
Yeah, we've heard that one quite frequently. I think it's certainly one of our most popular features. I think it certainly makes it very easy to connect sites together. I certainly remember some of the fun, and I put fun in inverted commas, that I had with connecting sites together the traditional way, if you like. And it's a long time. We've been talking about auto VPN for over a decade now, but still to this day, I think it remains one of the most popular
Yeah.
elements of the solution.
So that same customer, they came back to me and said, "We have a data center here. We need to monitor this from an environmental and a physical security." And I said, "That's great. We'll put in some cameras. I put in a couple of the MB32 cameras, an MB22 camera, put in the MT sensors for the water leak and the air conditioning, or the air temperature and humidity, and also the door contact, so they could monitor who was going in and out. And occasionally somebody would leave the door open, and we put that alert on there as well to let them know that somebody had left the door open. Shortly after we did that, we were watching the temperature graph from the MT10, and it started showing us that the temperature was going up and up. And it turns out that the air conditioning unit was about to fail, and they were able to go in there and fix that before it did completely fail, and saved probably, I don't know, two, three, $400,000 worth of equipment that
Wow.
was in that data center. So that paid for itself instantly.
Yes, I mean
You
that's
sure you didn't trip over the wire of the AC unit, right? You didn't unplug it
Exactly.
accidentally.
Yeah. Now the compressor was about to fail on it.
yeah, I mean that just goes to show how the right investment at the right time can, like you said, potentially save a lot of headaches. And we've had some really good stories about the sensors since they were deployed. Both the kind of example you gave around overheating, but also in the other direction, being able to see how much you're cooling your environment as well. Because one of the things I've found with some data centers is they're just over cooled, and so of course that's extremely expensive to do. And thinking about the sustainability side of things, there's all kinds of ways in which these sensors can just tell us more and help us make improvements there.
Yeah, I had another customer that it's a restaurant, a barbecue restaurant here, and they had an old freezer that they had actually bought from somebody else used. And as soon as the MT11 sensor came out, I got one of those and installed it there. And it wasn't like 3 or 4 days later that the sensor started alerting, saying, "Hey, this is getting too hot," because it was supposed to be like below 20 degrees, and it was getting close to freezing. And sure enough, they went in and fixed it and saved several $1,000s worth of food. So it, once again, little sensor, it paid for itself immediately.
We're sensing a pattern where you go fix things, things break right after.
Yeah, you'd think that there might be some collusion there, but there's not. I promise you.
There's
Cool.
always opportunities.
Yep.
I'm kind of curious. What would you say was the biggest sort of challenge that you've been given in terms of a customer real world problem that you were asked to go in and help solve?
So had another customer that makes wooden cabinetry for new homes, and the it's just a terribly dirty environment. All the dust from all of the wood that's being cut to make the
Right.
cabinets,
Yeah.
and they needed basically a complete solution. And the very first thing I did was move they had all of their equipment in like a cabinet out in the shop, and it was just so just covered in dust, and the equipment was just struggling big time. So the very first thing I did was move that equipment into a cabinet inside their office, but then deployed a number of the MR36 wireless access points out there. They already had a number of cameras, but just basically uh, overhauling that network 100%, and it's been rock solid ever since.
I think it breaks a network engineer's heart when they see their switches all gummed up with dust and in this case sawdust. Can't have been a pretty sight.
Yep, I was working for another customer, and they had a bakery, and they had a switch that failed, and I went and looked at the switch and plugged it in, and the flour just flew out of that switch. It was unbelievable. I've never seen anything like that.
Yes, not included in the feature list. Typically, that one.
No.
It sounds as though you get a real kick out of these sort of challenges that get thrown your way. Would you say that's fair?
Yes, absolutely. Very much enjoy solving problems. I mean, that's the whole point. Is making the networks better, making lives better, for the customers, so that they don't have to worry about the network. And it's become so foundational now. If you don't have a good foundation with the network, and especially power protection, the environment, and everything, that's basically layer zero now.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to labor or layer the network on top of that, and then you start adding in your applications, your phone systems, stuff like that. It really, if you do it right, it will work very, very well, and the customers just love it.
We're mixing the layer analogies here, so layers on layers, by the sounds of it.
The Bible talks about building your house on a foundation of sand, and that's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of that, and I've solved a lot of those problems.
What about trends? I mean, obviously we've been through a tough time with this pandemic, so it had affected a lot of people and changed their working patterns. What have you seen happening over the last few years?
So much of the work from home, and now that things have opened back up, Oklahoma never really shut down completely,
Mm-hmm.
but there was definitely a big change. And now that things have opened back up pretty much to normal, you still have a lot of people that are wanting to work from home. So the hybrid work is very popular now. And of course, that forced a lot of the customers to have to think about VPN connectivity
Right.
for the some of them for the very first time, and it was quite amazing to see that transformation in just basically a year or less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we saw a huge demand very very quickly as the pandemic started to grip a couple of years ago for these teleworker devices, the Z3s that we still sell. So that's the super popular way of looking at it. Sounds like a really interesting range of stuff that you've worked on, Jeff. I mean, what do you imagine for the future? What do you think? Where do you see this going? The technology, the networking side of things in particular.
So we've just about reached the point now where wireless and wired are equivalent as
Mm-hmm.
far as the availability, the speed, the reliability, and I really think the needle is going to start heading even more towards the wireless than the wired. I mean, the wired will never go away, but the wireless is becoming so prevalent, and I mean everything is utilizing it. So I really think that's where things are going at the moment.
And that's why we need more network addresses. Is
Yes.
that right, Mr. Handel?
Oh, that is a nice plug-in for for IPv6. I think you've been listening, Simon. It only took you 10 years.
We'll be making great strides on IPv6, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's fully justified at this point. I think the interesting one with what you're saying as well, Jeff, is the proliferation of devices, of course, and when we think about networking, we also have increasingly talk about cellular coming in, and we keep hearing about 5G. I feel like it's been the most hyped technology for so long now, and of course it's something that we're keeping a close eye on. I mean, how do you see 5G vis-a-vis Wi-Fi? We've got some exciting new spectrum to play with now on Wi-Fi, right?
Yeah, the 6 gigahertz spectrum is probably the biggest change to Wi-Fi since Wi-Fi was invented or deployed. That's going to be a game changer, and that just fuels the charge to switching everything over to wireless, and that's only going to become more prevalent.
Yep. Yeah, I can't remember the last time I plugged an Ethernet cable in. I still like to occasionally. It gives me that sort of nice nostalgic feel. Occasionally, you'll get yourself in such a noisy environment, but let's be honest, the technology advanced so far. Like you say, I mean, it's basically you can't distinguish it so easily anymore.
Well,
Yeah,
let me chime in for a second. Put my security hat on. With so much wireless, the engineer in me is always thinking, okay, this is still shared environment. It means I'm more susceptible to attack. What's your take on security, especially since you have a wide breadth of customers from manufacturing to uh, tribal nations to just healthcare, financial customer? What's the common theme that you see from a security angle there?
unfortunately, the thing that I still see with security so much is so many people are just clueless about it. They think that ignorance is bliss, and it's not when it comes to cybersecurity. And that's a constant challenge, is trying to educate people, that no, you're not safe. You really need to have a good quality firewall. You really do need to have the umbrella DNS. Don't be using Google, AT&T, whoever for your DNS, because those just blindly resolve stuff. You need those layers of protection to protect you, because the people out there now, it's not the kiddies in their basements anymore. These are state actors and organized crime that are going to try everything they can to get into your equipment any way they can and use it for nefarious purposes.
It certainly feels as though when we talk about simplicity, I mean, I often think about the network in particular, but from a security perspective, it's almost as though it's a never-ending challenge. It's a constantly moving ball as far as trying to help our customers achieve something like the same kind of simplicity with security specifically, and so that feels like it's going to keep us busy for potentially forever.
Yes, and especially on the MX firewalls. I mean, it's 3 clicks to turn on the AMP for endpoints, the content filtering. I mean, it's so easy to do that, and people look at that and they think, okay, what did you just do? And I go, I just protected you, from a lot of threats, and they're just okay, and they just go on about their business.
It's almost deceptively simple, and just clicking that
Yes,
button and hitting save is, and there's so much going on in the background. And that's of course how it should be. I mean, ultimately that's what technology should be doing, right? It should be making everybody's lives easier, and the human nature aspect. Obviously, not everybody is into the tech as much as perhaps the three of us are, but we've got to make it accessible and protect everybody. I mean, it's our responsibility in a sense. Okay, well, let's start bringing things towards a conclusion. I think, Jeff, I'm sure anybody who's listening is sort of revved up and excited about some of these solutions, the breadth of what we've talked about, and what you've been involved in, and your enthusiasm for it, which is very evident. What sort of advice would you give for anybody who's thinking about sort of starting off on a journey of becoming a solutionist? Let's put it that way. Somebody who's going out and trying to fix some of those real world problems.
So the young people that are just coming out of high school, they basically have a choice. They can go the college route and uh, you know gain a lot of experience that way. But a lot of the technical schools, that are teaching the Cisco networking academies and stuff like that, that's also a really good way, to get into the basically the industry.
Hmm.
And every Cisco partner needs certified, Cisco engineers to grow their business and to keep up. So, if you have those Cisco certifications, you're going to be set for life,
Hmm.
because they're in high demand, and that demand is only going to increase.
Yeah, I can certainly see that. Mr. Handel, anything you'd add to that?
Well, and as we heard, it's no longer a one-dimensional thing. It's no longer just connectivity, which is where we focused in the early
Hmm.
days of token ring and converting to Ethernet. We focused on connectivity, but now there's many more dimensions to IT. It's about security. It's about environmental sensors. When did we think that the environment would be important for a network? Well, now all those worlds are converging. There's a lot of opportunity, and there's still a lot of untapped potential out there. I mean, you guys touch upon wireless. Well, wireless now includes satellite connections too. That's a whole different ballgame. So it's definitely getting very excited, and so plenty of potential there.
I would agree 100%. I think the challenges are going to keep on evolving as technology advances, and it is exciting to go out and try and solve these problems. I think for me that's the most interesting part is when you see your technology applied out in the real world, so that people who are going about their regular business who don't consider networking the most important thing at the center of their world, they can just get on with whatever it is that they're trying to do. So we're really excited about that, and it's so awesome to speak to somebody who's out there doing it for real at the sharp end. So, Jeff Bright, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, Mr. Handel, thank you also for your time.
No problem. And just remember, last words of what advice. Don't look at things as one dimensional. Look at it as multi-dimensional. And Mr. Bright is living that. He's solving one problem, but many at a time. And some of his work is published out in the community. So join the community and check it out.
Oh, yes, good idea. Plug the Meraki community. Let's do it. community.meraki.com.
Yep, I've got a new project to post out there very shortly.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So if you want to go say hi to Jeff, you know where to go now. Nice one. All right, gentlemen, thank you again. It's time to wrap things up. I want to thank you all for listening to this week's episode of Meraki Unboxed. We publish these every 2 weeks. And if you're not already a subscriber, you know what to do. Find your favorite app, hit that subscribe button, because we love making this content. And as I always say, if you have any ideas, anybody you would like us to feature, or if you'd like to be on the podcast yourself, you can easily reach out to me. Find me on Twitter, and my handle there is @MerakiSimon. I'm also hanging out in the Meraki community, so you can use that instead if you prefer. Just love to hear your feedback on what you think of the show and how we can keep it fun for you. Because as we've heard, there's so much more content and so much more to talk about. So this will keep us very busy for quite a while to come, I think. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye for now.